Hi, we are Siamese twins, Tony and Molly. Now we are 30 years old. We are sisters. We want to tell you our story. We were born into a poor family of farmers. Mom and Dad said that when they got married, for a long time they could not have children. The years passed, they did not get younger, and despair grew. My mother has undergone dozens of medical procedures and examinations. They spent almost all their earnings on trying to have children, and when they lost all hope, Dad offered to adopt a child. So, my parents began to prepare themselves and their home for children. And then, at the very last moment, when the nursery for Evie's future daughter was ready, my mother felt strange. Dad made Mom's favorite pâté, and Mom threw up right at the table. She thought she was ill and self-medicated, but the nausea got worse every day. So she went to the hospital, where she was told that she was pregnant with twins. Shocked, my mother ran home and told my father what had happened. They could not believe their ears. Dad screamed so loud with happiness that the neighbors thought he was being kidnapped. Well, they decided not to take the adopted child just yet. They couldn't believe their luck. Every day, my mother and father prepared the house for the two children. It was all modest, but tasteful. During pregnancy, my mother had some difficulties. It was not always possible to keep calm. Stress and nerves affected her health. Around the 7th month, she suddenly became ill, fainted, and was rushed to the hospital, where she had an early birth. What the doctors saw shocked the entire staff. A girl was born, followed by a second one. 2 different people were connected by a common pelvis. There were 2 heads, 4 arms, 2 bodies, and 1 pelvis and 4 legs. One of the nurses fainted, not expecting to see this. When we were shown to my mother, she was confused. At first, even thought that the doctors were joking. And then she got scared and screamed at the top of her voice that she must have been cursed. My father didn't want to pick up the fiend, as the neighbors called us. The first thing they were advised to do was leave us in the hospital or take us to a baby home. Such children do not live long, their doctors warned. Who knows? Perhaps this is what contributed to the fact that we were still left, not thrown out, but taken home. The doctors did not agree to perform the operation. We saw our childhood as ordinary. We grew up together and adapted to each other, but it was difficult to do it. We all have our own tastes and preferences, character, mood. For example, I wanted to wear a red dress and Molly wanted to wear a black one, and everyone else grabbed whatever they liked. But we could only wear one because all our dresses were custom made. They were sewn together in the pelvic area. Molly says, Tony and I used to come up with different games together to make it fun. No one played with us. Everyone was afraid of the view. Over time, we came to terms with people's scared faces. They avoided us like the plague. But that wasn't the most difficult part. When Tony and I were fighting, we couldn't each go to our own room because we were one. But when it came to paying for travel or utilities, we were perceived as 2 persons at once. Tony says, the people around us thought for a long time, wondered how to perceive it. And once, when we grew up, something unexpected and probably even unrealistic happened. I would never have thought that we would be lucky enough to survive this. Molly fell in love with a military man, and he reciprocated. I was genuinely happy for her. Really, but every time they cooed together, I felt awkward. I was used to my sister and I always being together, but they were romantically involved. Soon, they were going to get married. The ceremony was a modest one, consisting of a few close friends and parents. Perhaps if Molly's fiancé had any, they would have been against such a marriage. But fortunately, everything was fine. Probably too much for people like us. Molly goes on to say, I was insanely happy. I was lucky enough to experience love. Of course, not without my sister's permission, because she saw our relationship up close. I didn't want to embarrass her, but we had no choice. I was actually glad that we had lived to see this moment. My fiancé often thanked Tony for being so supportive. Well, then another miracle happened. I got pregnant. Yes, imagine that. The fact is that my sister and I are able to bear a child separately. So I waited for the baby, and my sister supported me as best she could. Of course, this has affected our health. The immune system is very much weakened by such a load, But we survived, and I gave birth to an absolutely healthy boy. My husband and I named him Hop, which means hope in English. My husband and I were very happy. Although our family was showered with thousands of views, some were afraid, some despised and hated, some were just curious, but we learned to live with it. Tony says, when she gave birth, I was so worried. Just imagine that your body, even partially, gives birth separately from you. I felt her condition, the pain, the fear. I went through it with her, and that's why I loved my nephew as my son. Unfortunately, happiness doesn't last forever. Molly's husband died in an accident, and not so long ago, we were diagnosed with hepatitis C. Yes, we were offered to take a risk now and have an operation to save at least one of us. But no, we thought for a long time and decided that since we came to this world together, we will leave together. We had an unusual life with its adventures, ups and downs. Did we regret that we were born? Maybe sometimes, but life is so unpredictable. It should be loved for what it is. If you ever meet people such as us, Siamese twins, do not be afraid. They will be pleased. They will not offend you in any way. It's just that we are special, but in our hearts, we can love just like everyone else.
My name is Anna. I want to tell you a story about my crazy half-brother, Tom. More specifically, how he tried to get me out of the house. To begin with, I didn't find out about Tom's existence very long ago. In general, my father and I lived together. My mother and I were divorced a long time ago, and I don't even remember her. Dad worked and I went to school just like everyone else. But one day, people I didn't know came to our house. I didn't understand what it was at first. A woman with a teenage boy asked me to call my father. I immediately noticed that something was wrong with the kid. He kept looking at me from under his brows. You'd think he hated me, but why would he? We don't even know each other, I thought, and I was wrong. It turned out that this was my half-brother. This woman next to him, his mother. We share a father. Naturally, we were both taken aback by this news. At first, Dad didn't want to admit this fact. He even pretended that they had the wrong address. But the woman was persistent. It was simple. Dad had an affair a long time ago with a certain person, and that woman, when she got pregnant, didn't tell her father about it because he was missing. My father doubted if this was his son, but then he looked at the boy and the questions were settled. He was an exact copy of my late grandfather. Apart from the similarities in appearance with the same hateful look, a little withdrawn, unsociable, taciturn. These two did not think long and stayed temporarily to live with us. Oh, I didn't say. That woman demanded a large sum of money from father for the maintenance of her son. Otherwise, she promised to hire a lawyer and resolve the issue according to the law. Well, while Dad was looking for money, they decided to stay with us. It was the longest 3 weeks of my life. Not only did Miss Holt, Tom's mother, make a mess of the house, but her son continued to stare at me like a killer. At first, I had no idea what this guy was up to. But one morning when I woke up, I saw a note on my dresser in my room. It said, "You're not welcome in the house." I can't say that I was scared, but it was unpleasant, and I knew that Tom was. I crumpled the paper in my fist, stormed into his room, and threw it in his face. I yelled at him, told him it was my house, and let him remember it. At this moment, Miss Holt came in. She saw her son lying awake in bed, and I was yelling at him. Of course, she got it all wrong and threatened me. "If you touch him again, you'll have to deal with me," she told me. Oh, I was beside myself with anger. In the evening, I had a serious conversation with my father. He said that he was sorry about all this, but asked me to be patient for him and my mother. Then he promised to get my mother back, no matter what it took. But first I had to get the money for these two. I gathered my will and decided to be more restrained. The next day, when I got back from school, Tom was sitting in the kitchen having lunch. His mother was hanging around again. My half-brother was in his favorite position, staring at me from the corner of the table. I pretended not to notice him and sat down to eat. Suddenly, the phone rang. When I answered the phone, I went back to my seat and saw dead flies on my plate. I glared at Tom, and he just sat there and didn't even blink. Remembering my promise, I silently threw my lunch in the trash and went to my room. There was a fire burning inside me. I wanted to throw that plate in his face. And so it was every day. Tom was always coming up with something. He would throw my neighbor's dog's feces under the bathroom door, turn off the light in the toilet, and once even cut up my favorite sweatshirt. I held on, but with the last of my strength. I wasn't ready to give up and give him my seat. This was my home and my family, and I was determined to stand up to the end. About 2 weeks later, the little bastard had outperformed all his crazy antics. I once passed by his room. He was just not at home. And there I found a photo from my photo album. Everywhere on my face, eyes are cut out. My mouth, my face is baked with a pen. It was a nightmare. I went to deal with Miss Hold, but she wasn't there either. I know it's not good to go through other people's things, but in her purse, I found medical reports that Tom is suffering from a mental disorder. He's paranoid. That's why he's so unsociable and tried to hurt me in every way. He's just not healthy, I thought. I told my father, and he spoke to Miss Hold. It turns out that she was looking for money for her son's treatment. He is always afraid that he will be left alone, and therefore behaves like this. I know he's made trouble for Anna, but that's only because he thinks she's superior to him in everything. He's afraid I'll leave him and take her with me. It's my fault that he's like this. Miss Hold said to her father and began to cry. I overheard the conversation and felt sorry for him. My father said that if possible, he would help as much as he could. After all, this is my son too, even though you hid this fact, he said. Dad was very worried about the upcoming conversation with me. He knew how hard the house had been for me lately. He asked me several times to forgive him for what happened, for the fact that I had to pay for his irresponsibility in my youth. Yes, I don't dispute it. I didn't like that everything in our house had changed and that we now had strangers living with us. But when I found out that Tom needed serious treatment, I felt sorry for him. At the same time, I saw how kind my father was. In general, the four of us have been living together ever since. Dad was actively involved in Tony's treatment. We didn't get along very well, but at least he stopped looking at me like a killer. And Miss Hold wasn't such a bitch.